Deposit grip, deposit card.
Yeah, I bet.
Okay, I'd like to go ahead and call the meeting to order, please.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As is our tradition, you're invited to stand and join us in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll quickly do a review of the published agenda. There is a consent agenda, and any item on the consent agenda may be removed for further discussion as an action item upon request by any board member or superintendent. Tonight we do have student recognition under good news and also some staff member recognition. We're looking forward to that. We do have one action item on the published agenda, and Dr. Kelly will be visiting with you about secondary math intervention resource adoptions. We do have one discussion item currently on the agenda, and Superintendent Harwood is going to walk the board through a preliminary analysis of 2018-19 enrollment. We do have patron input on the agenda, and as a reminder, if there is patron input regarding an item on the agenda, then that patron input will be with that agenda item. And there are some written reports that were included in the board packet under alert.
Okay, thank you. Any changes?
Yeah, if it would be okay, I would like to open discussion after we get through all the first half of this, just to talk about the pool conversation that's been taking place with the city of Shawnee, since I wasn't able to attend the work session, if that's possible.
Sure. So, add under discussion.
So it'd be under discussion.
Okay. Yes, Bill.
I got a conflict with check number 45959 for the mowing contract.
Okay. Any motions?
It's cold out there,
Go ahead.
I'll move to adopt the agenda and approve the consent agenda as amended.
Second. All in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed, same sign. It's dark, be careful.
It's scary out here.
I move to approve payment to Kansas Land Management LLC in the amount of $30,280 with check number 45959.
A second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Okay. All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Good news.
All right, members of the board, we begin tonight's recognition as a continuation from October. Last month, we recognized students because their artwork was selected for display here at the Board of Education. It's a special honor for these students. Tonight, we have 3 students who did not have opportunity to be here last month, and we certainly want them to be recognized and proudly show off their outstanding work that will be on display here in this building. To help us tonight with the presentation is going to be Superintendent Harwood, as well as we're going to begin with Taylor Newman, who is the art educator at Prairie Ridge Elementary. And our first student tonight is Luke Michaels.
All right, last year, Luke created a print that we created after we learned about the artist named Jasper Johns. And Jasper Johns was known for creating artworks that had ordinary things like numbers incorporated into his paintings and prints. And so I was really fascinated by Luke's use of, he created this totally new collage technique that he used in the background. And then his use of craftsmanship was just really, really great. And so that's why I selected his work for the permanent display.
So Luke, would you mind showing the members of the board? name is going to be Sadie Stokes from Riverview Elementary, and her art educator is Elizabeth Purcell.
This is Sadie's artwork that was selected by last year's art teacher at Riverview Elementary, Miss Hannah Brown. And Sadie was selected. I believe, Hannah did not share with me the reason, but I think it's because of the composition and the use of color and the brush strokes. This artwork is very much like the Impressionist painter Monet, who focused a lot on water scenes with water lilies. He was a very famous Impressionist. And this is a wonderful example of that type of Impressionist work. And Sadie confirmed to me that this is a Monet artist Impressionist piece, right? Also, Sadie shared with me that when she heard her name announced last year, as Artist of the Year, she nearly fainted. No fainting this time.
She's got it.
All right, and one. Okay, and the last student for artwork recognition is Corinne Schwint, and she's from Belmont Elementary, and her teacher is Joanna Trotter.
Alright, so I was also not at Belmont last year, but Corinne told me she learned about different landscapes, and they were also learned and talked about value throughout her artwork, and she created this beautiful kind of nighttime mountain scene with a painting. I don't know what else you can kind of learn from her when she told me about it. So, Sean.
And again, these pieces are going to be on display, and what happens is if they stay in USD 232 and graduate from Mill Valley or DeSoto High School, we give them the option of taking their artwork back, or they may leave it here. So if you haven't had a chance to do that, look around in the lobby, you see a lot of the artwork, and we do have some pieces down the hall. But very, very nice work. Thank you for letting us recognize you tonight. All right, we're going to continue with good news. We shared with you last month that we would be recognizing one of our teachers for an amazing achievement. Wendy Ping is an art teacher at Monticello Trails Middle School. She is also the 2018-19 Kansas Art Education Association Middle School Art Educator of the Year. Wendy, would you come forward so we can recognize you? Wendy officially received her award on October 12th. In addition to her work with students at Monticello Trails, she serves as adjunct art instructor at Emporia State University, a youth art instructor at the Nerman Museum of Contemporary Art. She's a board member of the KAEA and 2019 co-chair of the association's Professional Development Conference. Wendy is absolutely talented in the world of art, but more importantly, she loves teaching and helping students discover their creativity through art, as evidenced by all the artwork you see in this building. Thank you, Wendy, for caring about our students, and congratulations.
I'd like to introduce Deborah Ricker. She is the School Improvement Specialist at Horizon Elementary. Mr. Steve Crutchfield, principal, is not able to be here tonight. So Deborah's going to come up and join us. And we're gonna introduce a few staff members from Horizon with some good news. The first staff member I'd like to welcome up is Suzanne Cox. Suzanne is a teacher at Horizon Elementary School, and in the words of Steve, he sent them to me, even though he's not here. Steve says, Suzanne is a wonderful educational leader who is very passionate about the students who are fortunate enough to be in her classroom. Her teaching style lends itself to student exploration and discovery. Suzanne works very hard to foster mutual respect with her students, and her room truly seems like a family atmosphere year after year. She keeps up on all the latest trends in educational technology and is not afraid to try new things. Thank you for your service again. Next, I would like to welcome Philip Wagner to the front, please. Philip is the lead custodian at Horizon Elementary School. Philip has been an amazing addition to the Horizon staff starting in January of last year. He has made a tremendous impact on the cleanliness, upkeep, and maintenance of Horizon. Philip has established great relationships with students, staff, and parents, and can even be found playing a game of football at recess from time to time. Thank you for your service, Philip.
At this time, I'd like to ask to come forward the administrative team from Mill Creek Middle School, Josh Kindler, the principal, and Denise Labor-Seawood, the associate principal. This evening, we're going to recognize a couple members of the Mill Creek Middle School staff. The first member of the staff we'd like to recognize this evening is Jill Church. Jill, come forward, please. I'd like to read a few words that Mr. Kindler put together for me. Jill Church is a dedicated 7th grade math teacher to our district, and she has helped build our vision from the beginning when we opened in 2007. Mrs. Church is a great teacher who meets her students where they are at. She has a positive relationship with her students, colleagues, and our community. We appreciate all that Mrs. Church does for our students in and out of the classroom. Thank you, Mrs. Church. The second member of the staff we'd like to recognize at Mill Creek unfortunately could not be with us this evening. Her son had a soccer banquet to attend, and that is Brenda Carroll. Brenda Carroll is the nurse at Mill Creek. This is Brenda's second year as our school nurse, and she has done wonderful things to improve our nursing department. She is a positive light for our students and provides our families with resources to improve their overall health care at home. She is dedicated and believes that every child matters. We are very fortunate to have Brenda on our Mill Creek team. And Josh will be presenting her certificate at faculty.
So to wrap up our good news for this evening, next month we will have 2 groups of state champions here. We will have the Mill Valley High School girls golf team and the Mill Valley High School girls cross country team. And so you'll learn more about that in December. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Albie. At this point, we're gonna start the action items, but if there's anyone who just has to leave, please feel free, or you can stay and join in the fun. your time with us.
Bye, Julie.
This is yours.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I got halfway home.
Okay. Carry on with our action item.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about MTSS, specifically with our math intervention resources. MTSS, if you recall, is multi-tiered systems of support, and we do our best to make sure that we structure our core curriculum to meet the needs of all kids, but there's always going to be some kids who just need a little bit extra support. And that's what we've been going through and looking at about how we can do that and provide those services to those students. So just to review where we've been, work was started with Dr. Yurkovich, who was the curriculum director before I arrived, and the committee, which was comprised of teachers and some other staff, determined that there was a need to go through a structuring process. Last year, it was decided that we would bring on TASM, which is the Technical Assistance Support Network, which is the professional development arm of the Kansas State Department of Education. And so we brought them on to help us through that process. And so when we looked at a timeline, we had talked about it and talked with TAS and talked with staff. Originally, we had looked at implementation at the beginning of this school year, but after going through some of the process, we listened to our staff and determined that maybe we should push that back a little bit. So if we look at this process, this is an overview of the types of actions that we take in order to determine, if we're meeting the needs of each kid. We start with a universal screener, which we're using FastBridge. You may have heard us talk about that. And then we look at how they do on the screener, and students may fall into Tier 1, which means that they have access to the general curriculum. Tier 2 means that we spend a little bit of extra time in either reading, math, or behavior instruction, and then Tier 3 is additional time and additional supports in those areas. And so if you look at the flow chart, we go through, we determine the instructional level by looking at placement tests, and then determine if they're doing all right by looking at progress monitors through that process. This is a lot like the medical process. I mean, if someone goes in and they determine that they have a health issue, there's a diagnosis, and then we monitor the health of the patient as we go through that process. So when we looked at intervention resources that would support the general ed curriculum, we looked at something that would be research-based, something that had a diagnostic that would help us kind of whittle down to determine what exact skills the student needed help with, and then also looking at a progress monitor. A couple of challenges. We asked TASM for their help, and we also asked the committee for their help in identifying resources, and there's just not as many resources for tier instructional materials as there would be for Tier 1 instruction material. So we looked at elementary. We piloted the Number Worlds resource by McGraw-Hill and Do the Math by Hoofman, Mifflin, Harcourt. At the middle level, Number Worlds also extended into grades 6 through 8, and we continue to look at that, as well as Do the Math Now by HMH. And then at the high school level, we looked at Do the Math Now as well as Transmath by Voyager Source Learning. So we tried to learn from other districts who had gone through this process and also reach out to Melissa Fast, who is awesome. She is the math consultant at KSDE, in order to develop a scoring rubric that our teachers could use to evaluate the different intervention resources. And we also created a timeline and shared access to online resources. One of the challenges that we faced was, as opposed to a Tier 1 resource, the companies were hesitant to give us full kits for the teachers to use throughout the pilot process. So we had to, we were granted access to sampling materials. The physical kits weren't totally complete, but for example, like with Number Worlds, we had access to a grade level kit. So we knew, like, if a student was at 4th grade, we would have access to a 3rd grade intervention, which means that, you know, the student, if they're at 4th grade, they wouldn't be on grade level, but they would be able to work through some of the skills that they may have needed help with that were at a 3rd grade level. And so we came up with a schedule for rotation, and I delivered those on a regular basis. And so we were able to collect that data from staff and principals, and then tabulate that survey data and then bring it to a committee. So all teachers were eligible to fill out and respond to the surveys. At the elementary level, we had 34 respondents for Number Worlds and 44 for Do the Math. It was pretty close when we tabulated the averages, and we tabulated the scores on performance indicators. But in the end, the elementary committee, after expressing some concern about staffing, they went ahead and selected Number Worlds. At the middle levels, the Number Worlds materials were selected, and at the high school, Transmath was selected. Feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions.
I have some questions, but I'll let you go through and then we'll come back and.
Sure. So throughout this process, we've been able to get information from our teams, and so we were able to talk with elementary administrators and some staff. And so elementary is a little bit different in that, as opposed to secondary, where you have a math teacher who's delivering a math intervention. At this point in time, our elementary teachers are looking at math, reading, and behavior, and implementing those at the same time. And so after talking with them and talking with the administrators, we're going to push math back a little bit so that we have time to structure and talk about how those work into our schedules. After talking with some of the middle school teachers, they would like to adjust the original order that was submitted last month so that more resources are shifted towards buying intervention kits for lower grade levels. So instead of buying, for example, an 8th grade intervention kit for an 8th grader, we would put more money into buying a 7th or 6th or even perhaps a 5th grade kit because they may not have those skills yet, if that makes sense. And with professional development, Number World, since it was selected at the middle level, we were able to bring in a trainer and give them some exposure to that resource and all it has to offer. And since we had paid for them to come in from middle school, they also, we were also able to have our elementary school improvement specialists sit in on that training at no additional cost. And then we also are going to have an opportunity to gather feedback from all staff throughout the second semester. So that was a lot in a nutshell. So I know you have questions.
Yes, just, oh, go ahead, Mitch.
I'm sorry, you start.
Well, mine was just, how many teachers did you say completed the surveys?
So, at the elementary level, we had about 34
Right.
for Number Worlds, and then about 44 for Do the Math.
Okay.
Yep.
And they were, okay.
So what we did was we opened it up for everybody, and then buildings had the ability to determine who filled them out, when they filled them out, because every building has different PLC structures and times.
Couple, 2 or 3 questions here. First off, what was kind of the timeline for the evaluation process for the teachers to have the materials and review
So
those materials?
Yep.
And we're talking about the intervention materials.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So online access information was sent in July, and then the physical kits were sent out about the first week of school.
Okay.
And then we wrapped up at the end of September in order to submit the alert item at last month's board meeting so it could be discussed and talked about this month.
Right.
And then we can move into implementation for MTSS in January.
Okay, so assuming that the teacher may not have seen anything in July,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they had the school year to the end of September, teachers did to review the materials and evaluate the materials.
Correct.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and we talked about the intervention materials last week. Have we selected, and these are some notes I had from last time, I said I was gonna ask it, and when we had the chance, I forgot to do that, my apologies, but have we selected the core materials yet?
That's an excellent question. So the core materials are on schedule to be reviewed next year. And so one of the things that we talked about with Tasman was, okay, should we just wait until we look at a core material? And their recommendation was, no, you don't need to do that.
Whose recommendation was this?
The Technical Assistance Support Network, which is the professional development section of the State Department.
Okay.
And they said that it doesn't necessarily have to be a part of a core resource because there are times when there are some core resources that promise interventions within their content, but there are times when that content is just a repeat of the core materials, which didn't work for that student in the first place, if that makes sense. So as opposed to going with an intervention that is a part of a core resource, the thinking was that we would adopt an intervention curriculum that's specifically for interventions that would approach the students, their needs in a different manner, maybe adjusting for time, maybe adjusting the activities so that's more project-based, something more hands-on. So those are the things that were taken into consideration when we talked with, we had those conversations.
Okay. So I'm assuming that we will want to somehow make sure that the core materials and intervention materials align.
Definitely.
Right?
Mhm.
So how do we, I mean, we've selected intervention materials. Now it feels like
Mhm.
we're gonna have a harder time potentially making sure that the core materials will align from just a core model perspective.
And that's a great point. So what we're planning to do is when we go through our curriculum mapping, we have a section where we have a district protocol and we have building protocol. So district protocol are the resources and the activities that the district supports. And then building protocol can do what they need to within that. And so when we look at an intervention like Number Worlds, that would be part of the district protocol. And so we work those into our curriculum maps and align those with our tier one resources with staff. And it's a collaborative process to do that. Yeah.
I want us to think about too that the intervention materials that we're describing, whether it be for reading, math, or behavior, are materials that you would, or intervention materials are materials that you would use above and beyond what the gen ed curriculum has to offer. So for example, if you think about reading, we just recently had our ELA adoption, and the materials that we are planning to use for reading for tier 2 and tier 3 are not, they're intervention materials that you would not find within a typical curriculum. For example, with reading, for tier 2, tier 3 students, we would focus on some comprehension strategies. We would focus on decoding fluency or decoding and fluency. Those would be skill sets above and beyond what the gen ed curriculum would offer. So there may be some differentiation with the core curriculum, but the tier 2 and tier 3 intervention materials are more specialized and unique to the specific needs of the child. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get that. I'm just trying to think through if there's any way that it's possible that in selecting the intervention materials and then selecting the core materials, next year, what are the opportunities for misalignment? Understanding that there are different target audiences, different approaches, etc. Right? Joe, you said we're not taking intervention materials from Acme, company because if their core material hasn't worked, why would we think that their intervention for that particular student, right? Okay. But I'm trying to think through what are the opportunities for misalignment of core versus the intervention materials. That's all I'm doing.
So the important part is that the tier 1 materials, the core materials, or the intervention materials are all targeted towards the standards. And so the standards have already been adopted by the state. They aren't very different from the standards we already have. So because they're all focused on the same standards, they should work together. There is always some overlap with intervention materials just because they're from a different place, but they're all going to be focused on the same skills and standards.
And if you think about it, these are intervention materials that came recommended to us. They're quality research-based intervention materials that came recommended by TASA, who works with various districts across the state who have very, different curriculums that are using these specific intervention materials. So I feel like the opportunity to be very low.
Okay. So, I guess when we do that, we want to make sure that when we start evaluating the core materials, we make sure that they
Absolutely.
do align.
Definitely.
All right, thank you.
Yes?
I understand hearing from a loudmouth math teacher that they probably need new books first. Math books.
Right, and
Before we go to this process here. And they said they're 2 years away from getting new math books.
so next year will be the review process. And so the reason why that is the new standards came out last year. And then this year, we've been sending teachers to professional development so that they get up to speed on that. And then this year, we had a secondary ELA adoption for textbooks that we had to budget for. Next year, we have the math adoption budgeted for. So we can go through that review process next year, and then our teachers will have the professional development they need in order to kind of see that resource through the updated standards and make sure that it matches what they need.
You didn't feel that you needed the other first.
Oh, the intervention one?
No, the core.
Oh, the core, right.
Before you go to this.
Yeah.
She said you really do need a lot in the grade schools before you get to this, so.
Right.
I don't know if we're wasting our money ahead of time without going forward, or, I hate to spend this type of money that would not work well.
Mhm.
Then I hate not to help the students that need it.
Right.
Or are we not helping the right students by not going to the elementary?
Right, and there are a couple things going on there. Number one, we're working with our elementary staff to see, where their kids are, to make sure that we're getting something that will help their students. And the second thing is, next year, we're going K-12. So we'll be having conversations at the elementary, the middle, and high school, but also, and something I've talked about in our curriculum instruction department, TNL departments, is that we need transition meetings where we have the elementary teachers talking to the middle school teachers and the middle school teachers talking to the high school teachers so that they all know what they're seeing. And so if there's a need, then we can start addressing that, and the earlier we address it, the better.
Was the majority of the middle school and high school teachers favor this?
Yes.
And the grade school was?
The grade school, it was pretty close in terms of the two materials. Middle school and high school, it was pretty evident what they wanted.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, thoughts, motions?
I have a lot of thoughts, but appropriate right now, so. For the context
Yes.
of this discussion, not inappropriate.
Well, if you need any follow-up, just feel free to ask me or Mrs. Height or Mrs. Hanson, and we'd be happy to provide that info.
So I'm a neophyte on this, and so I really appreciate like Mitch and Bill who have some little more knowledge, but does the core curriculum not, I guess I'm envisioning that if I'm writing core curriculum as a vendor, do they not also develop a kind of add-on product that is for tier support that utilizes similar teaching methodologies, language, the thought process, and so right? Doesn't it seem to make sense that you would kind of attach that module on instead of going to a different vendor and letting their sort of methodologies and language and all that? And then as an add-on question, do we not run a risk that we're bouncing tier support kids? If they're in tier support in elementary, they're using one product platform, then in middle school they switch to a different product platform, and do they not? Is that jarring to the student?
Well, I'll go back to what Superintendent Harwood discussed. What we try to do is base our instruction on standards. And so everything is aligned to standards, no matter what resource. And that's where there's power and collaboration and teachers talking about which resource best addresses each standard, and then finding out our skill, and then finding out what skills the students need through something like, and this goes to the first part of the question, an intervention resource will have something like a diagnostic that typically your tier 1 resource won't have. And the tier 1 resource just assumes that you'll move along in sequence. There's not a lot of room for backing up. And it's almost like a timeline. Teachers sometimes feel pressure to get through a book or to get through a certain set of standards. And that's how the tier 1 resource is formulated. Another part to that is in this district with the last elementary adoption, there was an intervention resource that was purchased within the program, but it was pretty lacking. From what I talked to, my discussions with teachers and principals, it was more of worksheets, and it had to be heavily supplemented by the teachers.
So just to follow up on Dr. Kelly's analogy with the medical profession, if you think about going to your family doctor, that takes care of most of your issues, but sometimes it doesn't, and then you go to a specialist, and that's really what a tier 2 intervention is didn't get it taken care of here, so then we go to a specialist, and a lot of times what that means is that person is doing something different. If they keep doing the same thing, then you're still going to keep getting the same results. So a lot of times, though every publisher says they have intervention materials in their core instruction, a lot of time I talk about it can just be louder and slower versus something really different that can get to really what we're talking about is about 10% of the student body.
Thank you, that helped a lot.
I have a quick question, Joe. So what's the use case of these materials? So if a student is struggling and is falling into that tier 2 support classification, is this something they do on their own time in the classroom? Is someone working with them?
So, we definitely.
And how usable? I think what I'm hearing, I'm sorry, I did that.
Oh.
I think what I'm hearing based on the survey results is, since they are all based on standards, defined standards, maybe the reason why one product came out over another product is because of the usability of it, and is that because the students are really focusing on that on their own?
So it's designed to meet the individual needs of the students, but we will need teachers to help with the delivery of that instruction. Yeah.
If the core material is not that good, why am I keeping it? Why don't I replace it right now? That's what I don't understand. If they're telling you this is bad, then I'll probably have more students falling behind because I got bad core material.
Yeah, and part of that, I would change it now if I could, but usually we'd like to go through a process where we get voices in on it, committees, and also think about the budgets that we have. And a K through 12 math adoption will typically cost for a district this size somewhere around $1 million. And we don't have that budgeted for this year in the plan, but we do have a plan for it starting next year.
But my purpose is to educate the children the best possible way.
Mm-hmm.
And have bad material taught and corrected as soon as possible.
Yes.
Jeff, just a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, Bill's question about, comment about a math teacher commenting on some of the current materials. In terms of the survey results,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not asking for that regarding that specific concern or comment, but were there some similar, or were there those kinds of things noted where some teachers may have thought we ought to do this instead of that, or A instead of B?
Open comment?
Yeah, in terms of the survey results. And,
Yes.
And how prevalent were those kinds of comments like this?
They were more related to questions about scheduling and human resources, more than the differences between the two materials, I would say, in the open comments.
I just wanted to get a gauge on, get some gauge on how much. I don't mean that, I mean this in a positive, but the dissenting opinion as to what should be done. Just kind of curious as to how that came across, if it came across, and so forth. Okay.
Okay. last thoughts, any motions, any questions?
And you always
Um,
have first.
Okay.
I meant that in a positive light.
Oh, boy.
Although you and I may be the only two people in here that understand what use case is.
Why I love these Monday nights.
Yes. So,
I have no more questions.
Okay. Well, if you do, feel free to give us a call.
go ahead.
I'll make a motion. I move to approve purchase of Number World math resources from McGraw-Hill for grades 6th through 8th in the amount of $13,712.44, and purchase of Transmath from Voyager, is it Sopris Learning, for grades 9 through 12 in the amount of $18,449.80.
Second? Okay, all in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed, same sign. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I did.
Okay. Now we are on to discussion topics. Opening or not opening moment?
Just these are the same numbers.
It's just the-
Just enroll. Are these the same numbers?
Those are actually the same sheet that you were in the board packet, but just in case you didn't want to dig through the board packet to find them, they'll be referenced as we go through there. So just to kind of go through this, every year on September 20th, we do our official count. We're going to go through some of the numbers from September 20th, but then also some preliminary analysis. I wanted to point out that enrollment estimates are part of one of the board goals. Has to do with the legislature school funding plan, and then one of the action plans was to look at enrollment. Again, I just want to say these are preliminary. We only got some of the data back from Johnson County, gave some of the mapping data back on Thursday of last week, so we haven't been able to spend a lot of time with the neighborhood level data. And then all the budget planning parts of the board strategy number 5 are dependent on the election tomorrow. So we're not really going to be talking about the budget parts now, because what happens with either the governor's race or how the legislature responds to the most recent Kansas Supreme Court ruling will have a big determiner on what our budgets are in the future. So just take the time to say, if you haven't had the opportunity to vote, tomorrow is election day, and please do that. So the sheet this was a copy of the sheet that was part of the board packet. So just to show you a few things, one of the interesting things is that we actually served 7,536 students. I'll say that number is exact and was exact on September 20th. It's already not that number, because people have moved in and out since that time. So we use September 20th as the official count. That is, it changes different, can be different day to day. The full-time equivalent students was 7,262.7. So I'll point out some groups of students that don't count or only count as part-time. So that's why we serve a lot more students headcount-wise than we actually get funding for. And the increase in this full-time equivalent students was 60.2. That's important because the count from September 20th of 2018 is the number that's used for our 2018-19 budget. So that number does go up by some for next year. Program enrollment, so these are outside of regular building enrollment. So the first one is early childhood. We have 3 different early childhood programs. At Belmont is where we have the early childhood program for identified students. So those are students that have, some of the students there have special needs, and then there are peer models, that's what the PM stands for. And then 40 of those students are there by appointment, so they don't come all day. So there are about, so when you look at the total of 172, but the functional capacity is only 144, 40 of those students aren't there during the day. One of the reasons I broke this out differently than I have last year is that with the bond issue and building a separate facility for early childhood, these are the programs that we'll be looking at being in that facility. The second early childhood program is at Starside, and that's a 4-year-old at-risk program. To be part of that program, you have to qualify under one of many at-risk factors. There are 24 there. We only get funded for 24. You can have a few more in the room, but kind of what we've done. And then the last one at Lexington Trails, if you're wondering why we have early childhood at Lexington Trails, that's actually our Parents as Teachers program. There is one room there where students come for some play-based learning. A lot of the time, our Parents as Teachers staff are going into homes. So that's why there isn't really a architectural capacity at all, because the functional capacity is how many those individuals can serve. Next one is virtual education. We have 11 students there. The important thing about virtual education are these are students that, for a variety of reasons, aren't doing well in the standard brick and mortar facility. We also use the staff that work with this for our credit recovery programs. So students that fail a course use the virtual education program to make up credits. It's actually a really good part of why our graduation rate is so high. The next one is the Bridge, which is a program for 18 to 21-year-old students that have special needs. And then we also serve 22 students outside of USD 232. So they are individuals that are USD 232 residents but aren't served in our schools. And this happens for a couple of reasons. We are required to serve students in private schools and some that are homeschooled if they receive special education services. And then we also have some students that require special education services that we don't provide ourselves, and so they attend other buildings or other facilities. Some of those could be Kansas School for the Deaf or Kansas School for the Blind. Building enrollments. So we have 7,204 students enrolled K-5 on September 20th. Actually, we did the enrollment report today. K-12, sorry, yeah, K-12. That's a lot of elementary students. We actually, we ran this report again today, and we still have 7,204 students enrolled K-12, but we have 2 more middle school students and 4 more high school students and 6 fewer elementary students. So we don't have the same 7,204, it just happens to be the same number. That's an increase of 5 students. So one of the things that comes up is everybody talks about how much we should be growing and how different this is. So that's one of the, what I'm going to spend most of the time as we move forward is kind of where that comes from. But just a little bit about student demographics. Percentage of students receiving free or reduced lunch is down slightly. That actually makes sense when you look at the cost of homes that are being built. There aren't very many homes being built where students living in poverty would move into. So the students moving in typically aren't students in poverty, so the percentage goes down. Special education and English language learning students have stayed about, that percentage has stayed about the same. All right, any questions on this? Because now we're going to dive into some more details of, and you didn't get this information earlier because I just finished it this afternoon. So the first thing is our change in enrollment. So you'll go back to 2000, from 2010 to 2011, we increased by 159 students. So you go across there, it's kind of gone all over the board. So from 16 to 17, we increased by 142 students, and this year it's 5. So it's a little bit interesting on how we predict things. So one of the things I started looking at is, what about the graduating class to kindergartners? So the first, all the way to the left, you have the class of 2011, so they graduated in 2011, and then the kindergarten class that started in the fall of 2011 was 100 students bigger. So you'll notice that one of the things that's happened is that the difference between the outgoing graduating class and the incoming freshman class has shrunk. Okay? That's because our classes have been getting bigger, and now we're to a point where we're graduating larger classes. So if you think about, if we lost 70 students from seniors to the following year kindergartners, and we still grew by 5, that means all of the other grades grew by 75 students. That's one of the trends we're going to see, is that's where our growth is actually going to occur. Because when you look at Johnson County is growing. And it's growing by about 8,000 people per year. But when you look at the births, since 2007, the number of live births in Johnson County has actually declined. So if you have more people, but they're not coming from babies, it's because people are moving in. And that's one of the issues that comes up, is why our kindergarten classes are small, but we grow as it goes in because people are moving in. When you look at the red line is our kindergarten classes. So when you look at the data, that's the the live births from 5 years before than the kindergartners that showed up. Kindergarten is by far the hardest to predict, but since about 2009, the trend line between our kindergarten class and the births in Johnson County from 5 years ago have been pretty similar. So you might expect that we'd see a larger kindergarten class next year, and it kind of goes up and down all the way through. Okay? One of the problems with the live births is that's in a calendar year, and then but we have this August deadline, so we're just at the time. All right, so class cohort enrollment. So cohort enrollment is if you start with a class and you follow that same class of students all the way through. So with the elementary, all the way to the left is a class of 2031. That's this year's kindergartens. So we only have one cohort year of data. First grade, we have 2. So does anybody notice anything kind of similar about each of those groups? Yeah, every year we have more kids in that grade. If you look at the class of 2026, that's this year's 5th graders. That's our second largest grade. And they actually increased from about 499 to 599 students over their course of elementary. That's a lot more growth than the other ones are showing, but so we picked up kids each year of elementary school.
Actually, 2028 grew substantially from.
They did, yeah, because it started off so small, right? But yeah, it went from 450 something to a little over 500, yeah. There's 2 more years to go.
Just validates previous statement.
Yeah. Yeah, so middle school kind of does the same thing. You kind of keep picking up, and then through 8th grade, you get, you're still seeing some growth. What we find is in high school, the growth stops. So our high school classes don't tend to get larger, if anything, they get a little bit smaller. If you think about that, part of that is that people probably are less likely to move when their children are in high school than they are when they are at elementary or middle school years. So, I mean, that's more anecdotal, but it kind of makes some sense.
So in the current high school class, what grade level is this starting at?
So the class of 2022 are this year's freshmen. 2021 are this year's sophomores. That's our largest class across the board. And then 2020 is juniors, and then 2019 are the students that graduate this year. Any other questions about that? All right. So building enrollments. If you look at this is the elementary building enrollments from 2010 to 2018. So one of the things I noticed is that Riverview all of a sudden had this big drop in enrollment. That's because, actually, that's one I do that. That's actually 2010 was the same year Belmont opened, I think, and so there were students were grandfathered into staying at Riverview, and then so as grades moved on, they left Riverview, but then the younger ones were going to Belmont. Belmont's enrollment has fluctuated and stayed pretty low, mostly because when Belmont was built, we were expecting the buildings that are now actually going on now, but stopped after 2008. Okay. Yeah, so the next one is, Horizon falls off quite a bit, and that actually corresponds with increases at Clear Creek and Prairie Ridge because of the boundary change. Middle school, one of the things you see is that Monticello Trail starts to decline. This was the same year that we started doing voluntary transfers. The other big thing that happens with that is that was about the same time that the really large class, that's now the sophomore class, was kind of going through. They were kind of a bubble class going through. You'll see in a minute that our middle schools stand to get bigger next year because the 5th grade class is the second largest class. Similar at the high school, one of the things you'll notice is that in 2015, Mill Valley stopped growing. And that's because we started the voluntary transfer process. So DeSoto grew rapidly for a couple of years, but then this year actually has about the exact same number of students it had the year before. Okay. Questions? So now we're going to move to transfers unless there's any questions about that. All right, so transfers. So we talk a lot about the voluntary transfers. We'll talk about in a minute. This are elementary transfers. So if you just look at Belmont, for example, at the top, the column with the BE at the top, those are the students that live within the Belmont attendance boundaries. if you follow the road that's Belmont across the 324, the number of students that are attending Belmont Elementary K-5. Belmont has a bunch of 140, or about 150 pre-K kids there as well, but just K-5 is 324. You notice the out-of-district column. Out-of-district can come from a couple of ways. One is we allow staff members to bring their kids out of district. The other way it could be there is that we have people that are planning to move in, and if they can show documentation of a lease that's going to start or a contract on a house, we have those people that move in. And then we also have people that start the year and move out, and then we have a school year transition waiver where they can then continue to stay for the rest of that school year. So then the blue marks that go through there, those are the students, like there are 289 students that live in the Belmont attendance area and attend at Belmont. The transfers within the district for elementary can be for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's because they started there and they moved within the district and it stays there. Could be a staff member's child, could be because of childcare. We allow in-district transfers called general transfers as long as there's space. But they have to apply for those every year. Okay. Questions on that? All right, so then middle schools, you'll notice that Lexington Trails has about 70 transfers from Mill Creek and Monticello Trails. Those will be the voluntary transfer people we're going to talk a little bit more about. If you look at Mill Creek Middle School, if all of the students that live in the Mill Creek attendance area and attended Mill Creek, there would be 711, but all the way to the right, you'll see that there are 661 because of the voluntary transfers for the most part. And then we have some Monticello Trails kids that go to Mill Creek. Again, those would fall under transfers from Mill Creek to Monticello Trails, or Monticello Trails to Mill Creek, or Lexington Trails to Mill Creek or Monticello Trails would be general transfers, and again, that's based on space available. All right, and then high schools, there are 217, averages about 50 per grade that are transferring from Mill Valley to DeSoto. You'll see that if everybody that lived in the Mill Valley attendance area went there, it'd be 1558, which is right at the architectural capacity, so it would be very full. We'll talk more about the voluntary transfers in a minute, but that's being effective. One of the things that I think we could talk a little bit about is out-of-district transfers. We actually have quite a bit of capacity, but there's a board policy from when we were growing so quickly, so much that we couldn't have our own kids have enough space, so we didn't take any out-of-district transfers. If the budget were an issue, one of the things, if you filled up the spaces, you get more funding. I'm not necessarily suggesting that. One of the things we're going to look at, especially at the high school level, is right now, if you are a high school student, if you finish your junior year, or if you move during your junior year and finish year, you can apply for a transitional waiver to come back for your senior year. The idea of the school year transitions being, as opposed for 1 year, but being for a grade span, has some merit to it, especially for high school students. One of the big things with that is you have to be in good standing. If you're transferring from out of district, one of the things you look for is attendance, because if you're coming 40 miles and you're not making it to school, you should probably go to the school where you live. But Johnson County has a lot of people just moving around within Johnson County, so sometimes it's not that far. So maybe something we come back with. So then with voluntary transfers, talking about the middle school, this is grades K through 7, actually K through 5 what's important here, and the number of students that live in each of the attendance areas. So the totals are different because there aren't any out-of-district transfers in this. These are only students that live within USD 232 boundaries, mostly because with out-of-district students, sometimes teachers will bring their child to the school where they teach, but then maybe not have them stay for the rest. I mean, it changes all the time. So I just left them out. So if you look at fifth grade, for example, there will be 98 LTMS students that live in the Lexington Trails boundary, but you'll notice that there are 134 current LTMS sixth graders. So the sixth and seventh grade are the actual numbers. I want to talk a little bit about some decision points we may have to make. If you have a 5-person middle school team, so the important thing about scheduling in middle school is we schedule by team. So if middle schoolers would show up in groups of 125, it would make life really easy, because that would be class sizes of 25. So that's where it's ideal. The middle school voluntary transfers have clearly been successful in helping balance enrollment. But when you look at the fifth grade, because it's a large class, if we get the same kind of percentage of transfers to LTMS, we're going to need more than 5 sixth grade teachers. Which means when you get to middle school, so a fifth grade or a middle school team is English language arts, math, social studies, science, and pathways. If you have to go to a 3-person team, finding somebody that those 3 people can teach all 5 of those things is sometimes difficult. We have 4-person teams, and that means that all 4 people teach pathways or language, what it used to be. 3 and 6 and 8-person teams get pretty confusing. So one of the questions that we would have is, for next year, we almost got too many 6th graders transferring to LT this year. So one of the things that we would like to talk about is whether the board wants to limit transfers to keeping no more than a 5-person team at LTMS, or do we start looking at shifting or hiring additional staff? So what that would look like is that if you look at the 5th grade class with 594 students, plus some out-of-district folks that'll be there, if you had about 25 of them, or about 20 of them, transfer to LTMS, you'd have 5 really good 5-person teams across the board. If you get 50 that transfer, now you're not going to be able to serve that with a 5-person team, and then you probably are going to have 4-person teams in one of the other buildings. So that would be the question of how we want to handle in-district transfers, or voluntary transfers. Do you have any questions or comments?
Are you looking for discussion on that?
Yeah, I mean, it would not kind of be the idea of the board is that, is limiting the transfers a better option than moving staff, or especially when you get, now, if you look at, if the kindergarten class doesn't grow and makes it to 6th grade, we're gonna have a lot of 4-person teams, so I mean, even then balancing would be, you might have 4-person teams across the board then, so that you might be looking at different numbers, but balancing enrollment so you can keep full teams at the middle school level. Is that okay?
I'm not in favor of adding to staff right now, considering that from the looks of this, it's a bubble year.
Right.
5th grade year is a bubble year, so it would be just shifting resources, is
Well,
that correct?
so right now, so there are going to need to be more 6th grade teachers next year than there are this year. But we have to look at what happens with the 8th grade teams, and so the 5th grade is really big, so you may need fewer elementary teachers, and then through attrition, typically then you would hire more middle school teachers. So there are going to be more 6th grade teachers, it's just kind of where they are.
Do you know, I can't remember if I asked you this earlier, how many transfers did we have to LT?
So 60 or 70. I had 63 and then 7 out of it. Yeah, 63 from Middle Creek and 7 from Monticello. Yeah, I can go back and find that.
That's across all 3 grades, is that correct?
That's across all 3 grades, that's right, yeah. So it's about, it's about 20 to 25 per grade. But this is a bigger grade, so we expect more transfers.
Okay, so I've seen a lot of data that tells me what things are and what things have been in the historical curves. And we've seen some diagnostic stuff that says this is why these numbers have changed. So, and we've seen a little bit from a predictive perspective that this is going to happen. So what I'm actually looking for from you, from the teachers, from the staff, is some prescriptive insight into what is the best way to ensure the best possible outcome here. And I don't know that I can make that decision or recommendation, certainly at the present time, but I would like to hear the insight, that prescriptive, that says, here's what we should do, here's the pills we should take here to make this the best possible outcome.
I can be very confident from conversations with middle school staff that they would really like 5-person teams. Yes, so, I mean, I will say that Lexington Trails in particular will get to the point when you start looking at growth, where there's gonna be, they won't get to 2 5-person teams, and so there's gonna be some odd things going on there. But if by, by administrative procedure, if there were 5-person teams across the board, I will ask again, but I feel pretty confident that that's the answer that I would get.
I am in favor of limiting enrollment, limiting transfer enrollment.
And we may get lucky and just get the right number of people to ask, but the
I
idea would
think
be
the
is
numbers
that,
are close
Yeah.
enough that there wouldn't be too many that we would have to decline versus potentially shuffling staff and.
Yeah, I would generally agree with that, I agree.
yeah.
Let's say a person's transferred to Starside for their whole school year, and then you're gonna come back when you get to Lexington, tell them they cannot go to Lexington. Or we gonna grandfather those in that have been transferred all these years? And
So-
they can switch back to Mill Creek, or just limit the new Mill Creek students or Monticello Trail students coming to Lexington?
That's how they're gonna limit things.
Right, so that gets into, if there are too many, how do you get through that? So that, certainly there could be, there could be a factor of if you attended Starside, then you get to go in the first group, because that's probably not gonna be as many of the, if you look at the numbers, we don't have that many students transferring to Starside. And Bill's point would be that if you went to Starside, you don't know some of the same people that would be going to Mill Creek, whereas if you went to Mize, part of your class goes to Mill Creek anyway, or if you went to Belmont, all of your class goes to Mill Creek. So
I do that for selfish reasons.
Mhm.
Okay, great.
I was doing it for a transition reason for kids, but yeah, it makes sense.
I'll tell the truth.
Okay.
I do have a caveat to my preference. If we continue to see this 5th grade class grow, and it's not just a bubble year, then I would want to revisit.
Okay.
In other words, if the prediction changed,
Correct.
So,
see a different prescription.
alright, so what we will do is make sure that when we put the information out about the voluntary transfers, is just make sure people understand that there is the possibility that just because you get it in by the priority deadline, we're still gonna be looking at space available. We may not have to do anything, but after that, we'll look and see what we can accommodate kind of from there.
I guess I would assume, does our transfer policy not specifically state that we reserve the right based off of building capacity to decline the transfer, no matter whether you're the first person who submits your application or the last?
So I would say that our policy would allow for that. That has not really been the practice. And partly that was that we were so much encouraging people to do the voluntary transfer that we never thought we'd get to the point where it would be too successful. When the information we send out doesn't really talk about, it's pretty much, we'll take all comers. We're just gonna make sure that the information says based on space available.
To a certain date is what it said this year.
Well, so what we've done, last year we put in a priority date, which says that if it's the Friday before spring break. The reason for that is that we start doing staffing after that, and once we've staffed the building, then it's just affecting class size. Okay, all right? So real quick about high schools, again, the high school voluntary transfers have been really successful. Additional staff have been hired at DHS to accommodate growth. So Mill Valley has kept the same number of students. So it's not like you could move staff from Mill Valley to DHS, but our high school numbers have been increasing. And that will happen, they'll actually go down a little bit next year unless we get a lot of growth, just because the 8th grade class is that way. So this is a transfer priority date has been helpful in protecting class size. So we have denied voluntary transfers from Mill Valley to DHS that came in after the date, because we just felt like if they were that, like this year for the sophomores, that was a big number of kids that we didn't take anymore in that group. The question that has come up, and it's mostly because Mill Valley moved to 6A this year, do we want to consider any other factors, like KSHA classification in determining, and the reason for that would be is that if Mill Valley is the fourth smallest 6A school, so if we limited some transfers, they would stay 6A all the time. So that's just, I'm not really asking for any, I mean, that's just a question that's come up right now.
Can you describe that more?
You're basically saying we don't want to have Mill Valley, the idea would be you sort of force Mill Valley always to stay 6A and not let it bounce back and forth between 5 and 6.
So I'm gonna say this, I would not suggest any changes for next year because Mill Valley will be undergoing a lot of construction. So not having as many people there is probably a good thing. But this will be a question that comes up if Mill Valley drops back down to 5A next year. At some point, we'll get those conversations about if you didn't have 217 going to DHS, they would stay one classification better. I'm not necessarily a proponent of which classification they are, but it does help with planning if you can be solidly into one classification or the other.
I'm not opposed to trying to keep it at the same classification, but not for, I remember when they're thinking about building a new high school in Lawrence, for the Gulf Free State, the argument was, no, we don't want to do that because LHS will drop down, we won't have as many students, and we won't be able to win our state championships every year in football. Not a good reason, there's other reasonable and good reasons around that, but to me, that's not a reasonable argument to make. This is about education, so.
Yep.
I think you can do that, but I don't think you want to bounce, every year or two,
Yeah.
so.
DHS would still be 5A even without the transfers there.
But I mean, in the
Yeah.
old days, we once stayed at 4A.
Yeah.
Then we had to go to 5A, then stay, then back down to 4A.
And there are high schools across the state that are on that bubble and go back and forth all the time. When you only have one high school, you don't really have any choices. When you have two high schools, you can adjust boundaries and you can adjust transfers. I will tell you, it will never be because of who the transfer is. That's not gonna be something we would talk about, but if we decided we really want Mill Valley to have to be at 1,400 students, let's say, then you could actually do the opposite with the transfers of only allowing transfers that didn't get you below that number. So, yep. And that's all the information I have.
What do you have to say about that?
Yes.
So what we'll be doing now is we'll be looking at neighborhood level changes, and this has much more to do with trying to figure out how to predict enrollment growth when you don't. Enrollment growth is a lot easier to predict when you can say, well, the classes are getting bigger as they come through. When people are moving in, you don't know if they're moving in with second graders or high schoolers or both, or quadruplets in one grade, and it's interesting.
Thanks, Frank. Thank you very much. Okay, next discussion item, Shawnee Pool, Community Center / Pool. I'll let you, yes.
So I've heard Rochelle and Frank and Danielle, thank you for allowing me the chance to have a conversation about this since I was unable to attend our work session. I'm sure you all have heard that was the day my mom found out she was diagnosed with cancer. So I felt it was important to be there with them at that moment. So as you all know, I think we're all kind of segregated into subcommittees, and I think I'm on the budget one still, and there's facilities and all. One of the other subcommittees I'm pretty sure I'm assigned to is like the sort of the Chamber of Commerce Committee. So I'm fairly active in the Shawnee Chamber. I attend most of their most of their lunch meetings and such. So it just so happened that after the work session, Frank called me and said, "Hey, here's how things went with the pool dialogue," because he knew that would be something that I might get approached about. And lo and behold, I got approached about it from multiple sources at the luncheon on that Thursday. And so I guess I was just hoping to just have a quick conversation again, because I think, the city of Shawnee, I also, as an aside, served on the Parks and Rec Advisory Council, I think 2 years ago. So as these conversations have been percolating about a community center, it's been nice that I've been able to kind of also be part of those conversations as a board member, just to make sure that that perspective is in the conversation. What has transpired from my view for the last, let's say, 2 to 2.5, maybe even 3 years, has been this sense that, hey, Shawnee is going to try at some point to build a community center. That has been in conversation for over a decade. The initial conversation about a community center occurred back in 06, 07, 08, that kind of time frame. But of course, we all know the housing bubble blew up, right? And so everything just came to a screeching halt. So that conversation started coming back to life in, let's just say, 14, 15, 16, somewhere in there. And as they've started having that conversation, of course, the natural next step is, well, if we're gonna do something quote unquote aquatic, and DeSoto is one of, I think, maybe the only school district in Johnson County, but Frank, you can correct me, if Spring Hill or Gardner Edgerton, I don't know if they have pools, but I don't know. But we all know that Blue Valley, Shawnee Mission, and Olathe do have pool facilities. So immediately conversation started kind of percolating of, hey, if we're gonna have aquatics and you guys don't have a pool, could we somehow find some synergies here to link up? So then I would say, in my perspective, 18 months ago, Frank started to be part of more of these conversations. They got more and more serious, particularly as the city council in Shawnee, we went through an election 1.5 years ago, and the membership of that city council sort of swung to the point that, hey, we could probably have this conversation really in earnest. So things have been speeding up, and all along, I have just been anecdotally sort of saying, boy, it would sure be awesome if we could find some way to partner up. I think Frank, hopefully I'm not speaking a term, has been part of that dialogue as well. So the city has sought out sort of the starting point of building this community center with the idea that they would include an 8-lane pool for a competition level 8-lane pool. Based off of essentially sort of this idea that, hey, it would help USD 232. It would give our students a pool facility. So that's how this conversation occurred. As I understand, the city was basically saying, let us know what you want, what you need. We said, if we're going to do anything, we need an 8-lane pool because that's what it takes to host competitive swimming. So the city said to their design team, hey, when you design this building, design it with an 8-lane pool. And then some conversations occurred about how could the district pay for that. And if I understand correctly, some options were given to us that would allow us to potentially pay for that. So the question becomes, we've got the city of Shawnee barreling towards seeking voter approval, most likely in the spring of 2019, for a facility that they thought we were interested in having an 8-lane pool attached to that building. And then from whatever happened at the work session, and I'm so sorry I wasn't there because I would have loved to have heard the conversation, but from that work session, what it appeared to be was we're no longer really able to partner with you at a significant enough level. Here's part of the problem. At a level that's significant enough to warrant the building of 8 full lanes and cold water, which is necessary for competition, versus 2 or 3 lanes, warm water, I'm going to say water aerobics type thing, right? Okay, so we've got competition versus just this little 2 or 3 lane kind of play area for water aerobics and such. So the city, I think, feels like jarred in this moment. And so, at the Chamber of Commerce luncheon, there was just this conversation of, well, hey, where are we at? What can we do? And so I would just like to gently ask, I think the city is eager to present to us this dialogue and to have open conversation. Unfortunately, one of the things we struggle with is our meetings and their meetings are on Monday nights. And so their staff is heavily committed on Monday nights. We're here on Monday nights. Again, I think that work session, unfortunately, we just didn't the stars didn't align for us to have that conversation with them involved. But tonight, what I wanted to just ask was, is there anything we could do to bring this process just one more chance to keep the door open, have the conversation? And unfortunately, the timing is getting extremely tight. They are trying to have final renderings of the building. That way they can go to their general contractor and ask for what's called a not to exceed bid. That allows them then to go seek voter language to go to a bond, which we've all been through as well. So, you know, they're sort of trucking along at like a train at 90 miles an hour headed this way, thinking that part of that plan was gonna have an 8-lane competitive level swimming pool. And then unfortunately we all said, well, I think we're not talking, we're not on the same page. Can we come together and have a conversation? Thoughts on this? And just,
Well, I think from my perspective, it really had nothing to do with cold water or 8 lanes or anything else. And if they were, my understanding is we've always just thought, well, we can have the discussion, okay? And when the discussion was had, we understood what the proposals were. And from my perspective, the reason I said no, it was because of the complexity of the contract that would, and all the complexities that would have to be in an extremely complex thing. And the cost associated with that versus the cost associated with what we do now. And then the third thing from my perspective was the liability of that, because once we would enter into that from a contractual perspective, we are liable, we are on the hook for that money from now until the end of time. It will always be in that boat. So those are the three things from my perspective that I got out of our work session. I'm not sure what, that's kind of what I heard from the others in the group as well. So, and it's a shame that they felt like they were, there's no reason for them to have felt that we were, already, 80% on board or whatever their thought was, because we hadn't even discussed it yet at that particular point in time. So.
For me personally, Kevin, when we started talking through the different options, I guess I was not clear on the community improvement district and how that was gonna work. And when I really took a look at the option, I thought, this doesn't feel right. So from my understanding, the way the community improvement district would work is it would come to the board for a vote, and we would essentially be saying, yes, we are in agreement that the entire district will, if this bond passes with the 8-lane pool, the entire district will be assessed a levy of 0.9 mils. Is that right? Am I saying that correctly?
That was the
The
estimate.
estimate. So with the bond just passing and us saying we're not going to increase the mill levy, and the fact that a pool was discussed for ownership within the district, and we essentially said, no, it costs too much, we want to keep our mill levy down. I just felt like this is kind of sliding it under the rug versus, because basically we're saying DeSoto residents, Lenexa residents, Olathe residents who live in USD 232 boundaries, you don't have a say in this. We are going to make this safe for you, and Shawnee is going to make this safe for you. So when I fully understood the extent of the community improvement district, I thought, oh, I don't know, I don't think that feels right. Then we started talking about the numbers. So we have 90 swimmers today, and of course that number could grow. We rent the Olathe pool for 99 days. We pay a total of $256 a day for the 99 days, which includes the busing and the pool rental. So that's a total of $24,000, which yes, comes out of the district's budget. But basically we're saying residents of USD 232, instead of contributing to the $24,000 a year you pay, you're gonna be contributing to at least $5.5 million. I'm not saying that I'm not open to hearing from Shawnee, I am. But I am concerned about, like Mitch said, the liability, and from what I understand, they haven't quite figured out how the operation and maintenance is gonna work. So we may be on the hook for this $5.5 million at a minimum, and we may be on the hook for additional operation and maintenance too, that yes, we could come to terms with on a lease agreement. But the fact that they do need to nail this down, and we are so close, makes me nervous on when would we need to make this decision, and how are we gonna communicate to the residents that don't have a say in this, that essentially the board and Shawnee are going to be voting on this for you. So all of those things made me feel like $24,000 a year is not that much for our 90 swimmers. We bus out our bowling team and our career tech students too. I love the idea of being in partnership on a pool. I just feel like this might not be our best option, considering that not all residents get to weigh in on it.
And I guess, some of the questions that you just brought to light, I've had conversations with the city manager in Shawnee and Parks and Rec folks and so as I understand it, and Frank, correct me if I'm wrong, essentially what's being proposed is, hey, we're gonna build this building, but we will cordon off the pool area and essentially transfer title to the school district. So we own the pool, it's our pool. But then we would enter into some sort of maintenance agreement with the city of Shawnee where we don't have to staff it, we don't have to worry about chlorine levels, which, again, Frank, you had been talking to us as a board that if we were ever to do a pool, that is a good way to do it. And you had experience with like the YMCA, I think, in Lawrence, kind of, if I'm not mistaken, Lawrence.
Yeah, Lawrence has,
sort of
Lawrence owns one pool and doesn't own the other.
the other pool, and they
Yeah.
share it. And so again, I looked at it and said, all right, well, this gives us the ability to not have to staff it, not have to worry about chlorine levels. The city, in some questions I asked with them today, I said, are you expecting us to pay maintenance costs? And he said, proportionately to our usage. So, if the cost of maintaining the pool is X, and I'm just gonna throw out a number, let's say it's $100,000, and we use the pool 20% of the time, our commitment wouldn't be, right? So we would be if we owned a pool by ourselves, we'd be on our own for 100% of all maintenance costs, all staffing costs, and such here. And the city is prepared to give us we own the pool itself. They're willing to make sure we have first right of refusal for any and all needs of that pool at any time, 365 days a year. So our students come first in what their needs are, then what we don't use, they'll program around it, is what they've talked about. So it gives us a chance to have a home for our swim teams that is theirs, which just like a football stadium, it creates a lot of school pride. I would also gently kind of just say, if we went to Olathe and said, we don't want to build a football stadium, how much would you rent us your football stadium for? My guess is we'd get to rent a football stadium proportionately similar in price. So sometimes we say to ourselves, yeah, we could do it another way, but for our students, for our community, we're gonna make sure there's a football stadium, a baseball stadium, or baseball field. There's gonna be a theater. We create sort of minimum expectations. And my thought was, we have been one of the only districts in sort of the Metro Johnson County area that has 7,000 students, has a 6A high school, and yet we don't have a pool for our swim team to take advantage of. I feel like there's a lot of opportunities to create some synergy here, to allow us to have a pool but not have all the expenses and the responsibilities of managing the pool. I think the city leadership, the city manager and Parks and Rec folks would give anything to have a conversation with us one last time to just see if there's any way to create that. But the problem is, as I was saying, the gun is to our head, and so I didn't know if tonight we could just keep the door open and see if Frank could somehow get us all together. And I don't know the complexities of that, because I'm assuming that's going to be a real challenge with Thanksgiving 18 days away. So that's all I was asking tonight. I don't presume to say that this is the right move for us, but I feel like, I sort of feel like we owe it to the city at this point to at least allow that conversation to occur.
I guess I would disagree with that, just in the sense that they've already had the conversations with us and they've already kind of laid it out. I think we understood that fairly well. And I think one of the big differences is if I spend $5 million on a pool, we pay $5 million for a pool, and yet we're paying for the maintenance of that pool, and if for some reason, heaven forbid, funding goes down, and we can't afford to pay for the maintenance of that pool, we own a pool that we can't afford anymore as a district, and we can't afford to maintain it, we can't afford to do anything with it, and I think Danielle's concerns around who can use it and who has to pay for it and all of that are we thought of that when we were talking before, but the complexities around that and just the operating agreement would be incredible, and I'm just not really, personally, I'm not really comfortable with it, and I'm really not personally interested in pursuing that any further unless they come back and say, hey, we'll give you the whole darn thing for free, you know, and then that's another story altogether. But if they've already given us their best proposal, I think, and I don't know why they wouldn't have given us the best proposal at this particular point. So.
And one other thing I hear you mention, and the only thing I will say is, I think there's a misunderstanding. We were the ones who proposed this concept to them, not them to us. Is how,
No.
That's not true?
No, so the idea of the community improvement district,
Which
Yeah.
we're using slightly different terms, because I've heard the condominialization of the
well,
building.
so the way that you said it mostly correct. The pool area would be condominiumized, which means that just like somebody owns on one side of the wall and somebody owns on the other side of the wall. The original conversations were, if you can build at least a 6-lane pool closer than Olathe, that's better than what we have. And so the original conversations were we would just rent space. So then as prices came in, it became more of, well, we don't know how much we can afford. And I said from the beginning, if you can't afford to build something that we can use, that's fine. We can keep doing what we're doing. So then we started talking about partnership ideas, and so we would help pay for the building of the pool. We could do that with some capital outlay funds, not $5.5 million worth, not enough to build the whole thing. So then, so I would not say we proposed the idea of condominiumization. That came up in conversation as really the only way that we could generate enough dollars to pay a significant portion of the pool. So at some point it became that we were building the pool, the cold water pool. That was not that was never my intention from the beginning, but when it came down to that might be the only way that a cold water pool is built, I brought it back to the board and as we talked about at the work session, it could be that the only way that a cold water pool that is usable for our teams to be built is that if we do this kind of this community improvement district where there is this additional funding stream through a new tax levy to pay for it. At the board meeting, or at the work session that we had 2 weeks ago, that was not, nobody that was there, and Kevin, you weren't there, because I know that you are, but wanted to talk more about it. That didn't get a lot of traction. So I went back to the city and said, I don't see us doing the community improvement district. We're still interested in partnering with the pool. Is there a smaller number that we could use for capital outlay? And certainly we're still willing to rent the pool if you build one. So I would not say that we proposed that. It came up in conversation, but at the end it was that may be the only way it could happen.
The 8-lane pool, we said was $8 million, not 5.5. 6-lane pool is 5.5. We're joining the Sunflower League with all the Shawnee Mission schools over there. Almost all our meets now will be over in their new swimming pool. So, and I can't use this new pool for classes. If I was gonna build a pool for the good of the district, I built it at my high school. But it's not feasible to do that. I voted for the swimming team. I voted for the bowling team. I was on the swimming team. I just found out tonight I can't buy math books, but I can buy an $8 million swimming pool. I don't think I wanna go talk to the people in this community and face them. Now, I'll be glad to rent Shawnee's pool, just think it's not, if we could have it for classes, education, possibility. But then we can't get our children over there to use the pool.
Just one clarification. Mill Valley has been invited to apply to the Sunflower League. There's been no decision about anybody going anywhere. So I just want to make sure we get that clarified. Yeah, it's a possibility, but it's no decisions have been made.
Well, I appreciate it. I just wanted to see it. It sounds like where we're at, and that's fine. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for your time. I don't mean to take up. Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin, for.
I guess one thing
Feel free to bring it up.
that we left the board work session with is that if there is a different proposal other than the community improvement district for a partnership, we'd love to hear that. But the community improvement district was the part that, and realistically, what could happen is that without that level of commitment from us, they may not be able to build a pool that we can use. That's,
But
we do that in the beginning.
community center is a great idea.
The community improvement district is where I have the most discomfort, and just making this decision on behalf of the residents that don't have the opportunity to vote on it is where I'm feeling like we couldn't do it with the bond that we did have a vote on, but now we're gonna try to whittle it in another way. I just don't feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, and Danny, I'm glad you brought that up, because I've forgotten that aspect of it, so that was a very uncomfortable part of it from my perspective.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for that. Any hatred? No hatred. Okay, well then the last thing is just again, bring a reminder that all the alert reports coming up, there's quite a few. So if you have questions or anything, let the